this guitar, which is a Soviet-made Ural 650 electric guitar. This was the Stratocaster of the Soviet Union. So, Soviet guitar production started in the late 60s with this model, the Tonika. The Tonika was the first attempt of the Soviet instrument builders to make an electric guitar. It's a oddly shaped, very weird electric guitar by some. It's a very cool, oddly shaped, very weird electric guitar according to others. That's a matter for another video though. So essentially, if this was the Soviet Telecaster, then the Ural is the Soviet Stratocaster. And as you can probably see, it's heavily inspired by a Fender design. So you have the 3 single coil pickups, you have a Jazzmaster Jaguar style floating tremolo, you have a flat headstock with a string tree, just like you'll find on any Fender guitar. It's a bolt-on neck, and the shape-wise, it's also quite offset. So it's clear to see where they got their inspiration from. Some people say they're inspired of Japanese, so Yamaha guitars of the 60s, and supposedly if you turn this one around, you get a shape that's very similar to a Yamaha model from the 60s, which maybe not. I see this as a Fender style guitar. So first of all, the idea of a bolt-on electric guitar is to have a cheap, mass-producible instrument, and that's exactly how the original Fenders were made. They wanted to make a guitar where the parts were interchangeable, unlike a Gibson. So a Gibson, if you glue the neck to the body and the neck breaks, you're going to have to repair that neck. It's going to be very difficult to change it. However, with a bolt-on construction, not only is it cheaper and easier to produce, also if something breaks, the whole system is modular. So you can take it apart, you can put other necks on it, you can put another pickguard in it. And it's exactly that design philosophy that this guitar is built with. They were made from the early 70s until the early 90s, when the factory, Sverdlovsk musical instrument factory, went bankrupt, unfortunately, and they were really the mainstay of the Soviet electric guitars. So if you were an electric guitar player in the Soviet Union during the 70s and the 80s, to some extent during the 90s, you were going to be playing on one of these guitars, unless you already had a Tonika. However, I would imagine that most people who did have a Tonika were looking to upgrade to one of these. So you hear all sorts of things about these. Some things could be construed as being true, other things could not be construed as being true, are simply not true. So the most common thing you hear about these is something like something along the lines of it's the bizarre Soviet guitar with the crazy switches and the terrible quality. So none of that is really true. The guitar is actually built to quite a high standard of quality, certainly judging by the 70s. So it would compare favorably to something like a lesser known Japanese guitar from the 70s. I don't have any brand names on top of my head. I'm sure you can fill them in. You know, they're the kind of guitars that look like Teiscos. Some of them were Teiscos, and certainly if you would get a entry model Teisco, this guitar is probably better quality than that. Something like an Echo, so Italian Echo guitars from the 60s, or Hofner, or famous German guitars from the 60s and 70s. This is very similar in feel and quality to that. So it certainly does not measure up to a Gibson or a Fender, but then again nothing else really does. And those guitars cost at least 10 times as much. The idea of this was not to make the ultimate musical instrument, and I don't think that really was the idea of I don't think that was the idea of the Fenders and the Gibsons, certainly not the Fenders. That has come much later from the beginning. The idea was to build a working man's guitar. That was what Fender was going for initially. And this is built along the same lines, so this really is a working man's guitar. I mean, it was mass produced in the Soviet Union. so that people were able to buy a domestically manufactured electric guitar for a decent price and of a decent quality. So that really is a working man's guitar. Right, playability and feel wise, it's okay. The neck is quite thin on this one, so they'll differ a bit. I've had ones with thinner or thicker necks. This is a thin neck, so it's quite smooth and nice to play. The fretboard is also not 7 1/4 inch radius, so I think most of them were made with a 7 1/4 inch radius fretboard. This one is a bit flatter. I would say it's a 9.5, maybe 10. I haven't measured it, but it certainly allows you to get more of a bend than you would on a 7 1/4 inch radius board. However, it's definitely not flat, so it's much rounder than a Gibson would be. You have a 0 fret up here, so instead of having the nut determining the string height and the scale length, you have a 0 fret. It's very important that you get the 0 fret on these right, so sometimes it'll be too high if it's sticking up a bit, or if it's not filed down evenly. You're not going to have a nice feel. You're going to have high action here, and it doesn't depend on the nut. The nut's only job is to retain the strings and make sure they go over the 0 fret at the right point, but the 0 fret determines both the scale length and the height of the strings at the first fret. You have a string tree, just like you see on a Fender. It keeps the 4 higher strings down, make sure they go over the 0 fret with sufficient force. 6 inline tuners, just like you see on a Fender. Let's see. Bolt-on neck, so you can actually, and often what you want to do with these is you want to shim the neck a bit, so sometimes it's a bit too much like this. You want it to be more flat, so you put a thin shim in there, just like you would in a Fender guitar. You have 6 switches here. I'll talk about those in a moment. You have 3 tone controls and 1 master volume control, and then you have a floating Jaguar style tremolo system, which is very nice for a flutter effect like this. And it doesn't bring the guitar out of tune, so if you treat it gently, it's not going to do anything to your tuning. You have roller saddles here actually, with 3 grooves, so you can select. And again, it's very Jazzmaster-esque. It's essentially the same design, just built a bit more simply. You have 3 grooves here. The strings don't jump out of these, so the complaint with the Fenders is that often the strings will jump around. It doesn't do that. So if you play it normally, if you don't do anything silly like that, the strings are gonna stay in place, and it's a very nice action tremolo. You can also take the tremolo bar out. There you go, no tremolo if you don't want it. But to show you close up how the switches and the pickups work on this one. First of all, you have the 5-pin DIN jack, which is wired up only to have two wires essentially. So it's a signal and a ground, just like you find in a mono jack guitar or any other electric guitar. However, what's quite cool about it is that since you have 5 pins, you could wire this up to do stereo. So you could have 2 signals running from the guitar out of the jack and get a stereo recording essentially. You could have auxiliary power going through it, so if you have onboard effects, which this one doesn't, but if you wanted to put onboard effects in or active pickups, you could feed the 9 volt through the DIN jack instead of having a battery compartment on the guitar. So that's quite cool. Actually, they put all of this they put this jack in all the Soviet music gear, but they never wired them up to do anything other than signal and ground. But I guess the idea was to at some point have the possibility to wire up more extravagant electronics. It's quite cool. Then you have a master volume control. You have a master volume control which controls the volume for everything. You have 3 tone controls, 3 pickups, and then 3 switches on top and 3 switches on bottom. And the way these switches work is very logical. There's nothing bizarre or crazy about it. If you look at it, you might think, oh my god, that's a lot of switches. What do I do? Where's the blade switch? I don't understand. No, you probably wouldn't say that. But where's the blade switch? No, there's no blade switch. These are actually on-off toggle switches. I've heard they're from some sort of radio. So basically what they did is they took electronics they already had and built the guitar with those, which is why you have the toggle switches. Same thing with the Tonica. Has also a grossly oversized for a guitar toggle switch. So it comes from something else. So the idea was, let's take what we have, because electronically it doesn't matter what sort of switch you have. A switch either passes a signal or it doesn't. There's no secret tone in the switch, and if you have this sort of switch you're going to get better tone. It doesn't work like that. To an electrical engineer, it's perfectly fine to use whatever switch you want, and if they come from a radio or from a car or from a washing machine or from whatever, it doesn't matter. Right, so you have 3 switches on top and 3 switches on bottom. So this switch is the on-off switch for this pickup, this switch is the on-off switch for this pickup, and this switch, surprise surprise, is the on-off switch for this pickup. It's quite cool to have an individual on-off switch. You can get them in any combination you want. So you have, this is only bridge, this is only neck, this is bridge and neck together, this is all 3, this is middle and neck, and then this is middle and bridge, right? Then on the bottom you have 3 tone switches. So the idea of this guitar is you have a series of capacitors inside the guitar that act as high or low pass filters. And the idea is when you toggle between these capacitors, you're going to get a different sound for each pickup. So again, this switch works with this pickup, this switch works with this pickup, and this switch works with this pickup. So essentially you have these 2 switches work with the bridge pickup, these 2 switches work with the middle pickup, and these 2 switches work with the neck pickup. So there's nothing crazy about it. It's quite logical. You can turn the pickup on off and then you'll change the tone. So you'll have a high or a low pass filter added to the pickup, and that's it. You then have 3 tone controls. So these are again pickup specific tone controls. So this is gonna change the tone of the bridge, middle and neck. Alright, that's pretty much it. Let's plug it in and see what it sounds like. So to do this, I have a adapter cable. So this is a regular instrument cable, and then this is a short adapter cable that goes from DIN to mono jack. So plug it in. I have an AMT SS20 preamp on the floor running with just a tiny bit of reverb. Sounds like this. Alright, so there's the bridge pickup. Let's try the middle. And then finally the neck pickup. And as you can hear, the signal is very, very low on this one. The idea of the neck pickup in the Ural is that it can double as a bass. So essentially, the neck pickup in the first mode functions and sounds more like a bass guitar than an electric guitar. And this is the same thing that you saw in the early Fender. So the Fender Esquire would have the same sort of arrangement where you could flick the switch into one position and it would sound much more like a bass. The idea was that, of course, if you had 2 guitar players, one of them could be the bass player sometimes, which is quite cool if you don't have a bass player. So let's see. More like a bass guitar. However, in the neck pickup, if you flick the switch on, it disengages, so it has a resistor. Internally there's a resistor that causes the low output and the bassy tone. If you flick this one on, if you press the switch in, it disengages the resistor, and then it's more like a regular guitar pickup again. Still pretty low output, but that's okay. Let's see, the middle pickup has the highest output of them all. The switch a bit more treble. And then finally, let's go to the bridge pickup. Sounds like this. So now this is what I call the out of phase setting. It's not out of phase, it doesn't reverse the phase of the pickup, it throws in a capacitor that just takes all the bass away and makes it sound incredibly scooped. I think it sounds cool. I really like this one. Let's throw on a compressor to bring up the level a bit. So then you can get any combination you want. So if you want to do, so let's put the neck pickup into guitar position and try to get it with the bridge pickup. Yeah, sounds like that. Pretty cool. Then if you add the out of phase switch, it's gonna sound really good. This sounds great with a phaser, so let me throw on a light phaser, see what that sounds like. And then, so another setting I like is what I call the rock and roll setting. So you have the bridge pickup and the middle pickup, with the middle pickup with the bass cut on. This is a really nice, like, that sort of thing. Right, so let me throw on some distortion. So go to the crunch channel, the preamp. So let's go to the out of phase sound. So you have bridge and neck with the treble cut. Sounds like bass cut. I mean. So if I want to boost this a bit, I have a tube screamer here. So turn on the tube screamer. So finally, let's go back to the clean channel of the amp and throw on some slapback delay. You can also increase the reverb mix a little bit to give it sort of like a spring reverb type of feel. Now let's see if we can't play some. Sound, so maybe this could be something for a jazz. Turn off the delay. Pressure still on, so let's give it a. That's the Ural 650. Thanks for checking it out. I think it's a viciously cool electric guitar. Certainly if you're into the 60s vibe, the bit of the retro space age kind of look, this guitar really fills that niche for me. As you can see, I have several of them. I'm quite passionate about these guitars, and I had a lot of fun making this video. I hope you had as much fun watching it as I had making it. I hope to make more videos like this about these guitars in the future. Certainly I want to make one about the Tonica. So, thanks for watching. Bye!